Hi, this is Dr. Mike, and we're back talking about sourdough bread. What is it that makes sourdough bread so special? What it is, it's this natural yeast, or the sourdough starter, that allows the bread to raise. Instead of using a packet of instant yeast or other yeast that you can buy from the store, we're going to create our own yeast from natural yeast and bacteria in the environment that will help make our dough rise. The difference between sourdough and other bread is simply this is our yeast, and we're going to be able to, today we're going to teach you how to make it. It's very simple, but it does take some time to make, okay? It takes about a week for it to get up and very active and bubbly. So today we're going to talk about how to make it. Basically, what we're going to do is teach you how to make a 100% hydration starter. What that means is that you're going to have the same weight in flour as you do in water. That's that 100% hydration. So here we've got a scale, and what we want to do is we want to measure out about 100 grams. This is how we're going to start making our starter. We measure out 100 grams of the flour into a bowl. Okay, that's 104, that's just right. And then we're going to put about 100 grams of water, and in this case, we're using room temperature water or fairly cool water, and I've added just a little too much, but that's okay. And so you'll want about 200 grams total, 100 grams of the water and 100 grams of the flour, and then you're going to mix it up into a paste, and it's going to be kind of like a thick pancake batter, okay? And this is about what it looks like. Now, sometimes when you're feeding and we'll talk about feeding your starter in a moment, but sometimes when you're feeding your starter, you don't want to get out your scale and weigh things exactly. And so most of the time I feed my starter, I put in a cup of flour and just less than a cup of water. And I know the consistency that I want in the starter, and that's what I put in. So what's the difference between this starter and this flour and water mixture that I've just made? And that is that this is fermented and this isn't. So how are we going to ferment this? Well, basically it's just time, okay? There are natural yeast in the flours, in the wheat seeds, and there is natural yeast in the environment that's going to ferment this flour and water mixture over time. So what we're going to do is cover this with a little cellophane, and I like it to breathe a little bit, so I'll perforate that cellophane, and we'll simply leave it for a couple of days out on the counter until it starts to become bubbly, okay? Now, it's a good idea after a couple of days, when it starts to bubble a little bit, to remove some of the flour and water mixture and toss it, and add more flour and water in the same ratio. Again, maybe another 100 grams of flour and another 100 grams of water, just so that that fermenting mixture has something to feed off of. And so, and then after about day 3 or 4, feed it each day a little more flour and a little more water. You don't want the volume to expand so much, so you might have to discard some. And by about day 7, you'll start to see that mixture become bubbly and start to expand. You'll also start to notice that every time you add flour, it starts to expand on its own and starts to rise. Now, what happens if after a week you only have a few bubbles, but it doesn't look super active? If that happens, there are a couple things you can do. You can add just a little bit of instant yeast to it to help it. Or you can add a little sugar or both for that yeast and that bacteria to feed on, and that can help activate that starter for the first time. So basically, to make the starter, that's how we're going to do it. After about a week, it's going to be wonderful. Now, how do we take care of a starter? Okay, taking care of a starter is fairly easy if you're using it every day. If you're using it every day, what you do is simply, once you've used it, you feed it again with another cup of flour and 2/3 or 3/4 cup water, and just make sure that you feed it every day if it's out on the counter. Most people aren't making sourdough bread every day, and so what most people do is feed it about once a week. They'll take it out they'll feed it about 8 hours before they use it, and it'll become nice and bubbly before they use it. They'll use it, they'll feed it again, and then put it back in the refrigerator. In the refrigerator, it will last about a week before you need to feed it again. Some people will let it go longer. It's pretty robust, so if you forget about it or you go on vacation for a while, you can come in, and sometimes it'll go to alcohol a little bit, and you can dump off the little excess alcohol on the top. If it becomes moldy, sometimes you can even salvage it by digging down below it and getting the part that's not moldy and getting a tablespoon or so, and then feeding it with more flour and water. So again, not ideal to make it to let it go moldy. You want it to be this nice, lovely, sort of slightly sour and a little bit sweet smell to your starter, and that will last for years and years and years. There are starters that have been around for decades and even longer. And again, feel free to get some from a neighbor if you don't want to make your own. But if not, you can make your own, and it's a fun project.